Welcome, everyone, to this webinar. I'm Kate Cower, and I'm our Fisheries Strategy Lead for the California chapter for the Nature Conservancy and chair of our North America Fisheries Strategy. I've been here at the Conservancy for 14 years, all of it working in California and with our teams across North America and the Pacific, looking to improve how fisheries are managed and how we can support communities and ocean health. And we are really excited to have you here today to get to hear about our sustainable fisheries work across the Pacific. And I've got my colleague Alex Falus here, who's our Director of Sustainable Fisheries in the Micronesia program. And he's going to take us behind the scenes in the Pacific. And then my colleague Kalani Kiocho, who's our Hawaii Island Marine Program Director, is going to join us for a Q&A, and we're going to get to share a little bit more about how our approach touches down in Hawaii too. So this map shows the places where we're working with communities on sustainable fishing. And this is possible because the Nature Conservancy is a global organization. So we work in 79 countries and territories around the world, all to conserve lands and waters on which all life depends. And globally, the threats to ocean health are a bit daunting. We got climate change and warming oceans, to accelerating pollution and habitat destruction, and the overharvest of marine species. And for all of us as part of a global organization, what we're doing is working to understand shared challenges and common barriers to ocean health that are relevant in all of these different geographies that have really diverse contexts. And so our approach that we take is to innovate and test and refine solutions. And then we look to demonstrate those benefits in place-based projects on the ground in the water, some of which you'll get to hear about today. And then we work to try to scale those solutions, whether that's trying to replicate them across more geographies or looking to equip partners that can apply them in more places, or even influencing policies or markets that can help accelerate all these transitions to those approaches. So today we're going to dive into how our teams are tackling some of these really urgent challenges facing our oceans, like unsustainable fishing, and how we're demonstrating solutions and looking to scale their impact. So today, more than a third of global fisheries are overharvested or in decline due to poor management. And unsustainable fishing represents a top threat across ecosystems, especially those like coral reefs. And today, fisheries, we know fisheries are incredibly important globally. Fishing feeds billions of people, it supports economies and livelihoods, and fishing creates countless recreational and cultural opportunities for all of us to connect with the ocean. And across the Pacific, fishing really is a way of life. Families go fishing together. It can be a main source of employment, and it delivers a really critical food source. And coastal fisheries in particular are so important, not just in the Pacific, but globally. These are fisheries that operate closer to shore in areas of really high biodiversity, and they make up an estimated 40% of total global catch. They employ almost 1 in 12 people globally, and they generate over $77 billion in annual revenues. The challenge for these fisheries is that the majority of them are unassessed, they're undermanaged, and they can be overharvested. And that really creates dire consequences, not just for the people who depend on these resources, but also the ecosystems that sustain them. Fortunately, science has shown that effective management of fishing is one of the most powerful ocean conservation tools at our disposal. And that's because improving how we manage can really increase fish populations and ecosystem resilience, and it can increase sustainable protein sources and all that value and benefit that we get from fishing over the long term. So for over 20 years, TNC's worked at this intersection in a lot of different geographies. We collaborate with fishermen, with communities, with governments, with lots of other partners, and we look to use science-based approaches that are going to improve fisheries management that can protect all of this critical biodiversity and ensure that we have thriving coastal livelihoods and cultural connections to the ocean. And so we've learned that even across different places with different contexts like California or French Polynesia and Hawaii, there really are shared challenges across each of these. And one of the most common is that we're lacking information about species health, and we have a lag or a gap that exists between collecting any of that information and then turning it into simple rules that really work for communities. And so today, we're going to hear more from Alex about how a solution to these challenges is being implemented now in Micronesia and French Polynesia. And so first, I'll give just a little context on Micronesia and Polynesia. So Nature Conservancy's been in this region working along Micronesian communities and governments for over 30 years, all to support them in their efforts to protect and restore and sustainably manage all of these valuable resources and biodiversity. And more recently, we've just expanded projects into American Samoa and French Polynesia, really to build local community capacity so that we can effectively manage coastal fisheries, coral reefs, and marine protected areas. And so on the map here, you can see the islands themselves highlighted, and then also the exclusive economic zones that these countries and territories control. And those zones extend almost 200 miles from shore. So the ocean and the landscapes in this region support incredible biodiversity. Over 800,000 people that speak 12 different languages, more than 480 species of coral, 1,300 species of reef fish, and up to 30% of the world's tuna supply. And so protecting Micronesia's diverse marine resources really offers up an outsized opportunity to try to advance global efforts to resist extinctions, to create sustainable fisheries, and conserve 30% of the world's oceans by 2030. And Pacific Islanders are also inextricably dependent on ocean health. Life in Micronesia and Polynesia is rapidly shifting now with climate change, with increasing development, increasing global demand for resources like tuna, and all of that drives threats like habitat loss and sedimentation of coral reefs and overfishing. And while many of those problems can originate from far away, Pacific Island communities and their governments must deal with the consequences. And so I'm going to turn it over here to Alex, and he's going to introduce himself, and then we're going to share some of how these challenges touch down in Micronesia and French Polynesia, and how we're working with communities to achieve sustainable fisheries for ocean health.
Hi, everybody. Excuse me. Nice to meet you all. I just wanted to, before I get into Micronesia, Polynesia, and the work we're doing for fisheries, just introduce myself quickly. So this is me. On the left-hand side of the screen, that's me on my 3rd birthday with my first king salmon. And really all I can say about myself is that I really love fish. I love fishing. And I love the people that depend on fish. And so for my entire life and now my career, I've worked towards either in fishing or fish, studying fish, working with people. And I ended up working on a PhD on studying the bonefish fishery on Anna Atoll, which is called Kyokyo. I'll tell you a little bit about that. And now today, I work for TNC, leading a team of really passionate fisheries practitioners that are working to conserve these fisheries across the Pacific. So that's me. And I'll tell you a bit about French Polynesia. So I'm going to focus this talk on French Polynesia, but a lot of it applies to Micronesia and other work we're doing there. But so French Polynesia is an area has a very vast EEZ. I think you saw it on the map Kate showed. It's this area the size of Europe. And within that, there's 5 archipelagos. And within that, there's hundreds of islands. And those islands all have very rich marine ecosystems with some of the world's best coastal coral reef fisheries on the planet. There's a real mix of uninhabited and inhabited atolls. And on those inhabited atolls, there's a need for fisheries management. So why? Because people depend on these fisheries. So from food security to small scale commercial fisheries, which you can see in the top left corner, to pearl aquaculture. It's actually where black pearls come from in the Tuamotu archipelago of French Polynesia. And the country also has a very thriving ecotourism industry where people come to see the fish and coral reefs that are there. And it's also, all marine resources are culturally important for the many communities that live in this region. And so with the growing demand on these resources, the government of French Polynesia reached out to TNC in 2019 and asked if we could help improve fisheries management in them. So I think it's really important, before I go on, is to say what is fisheries management and what are the objectives? Because I think often there's a misconception that fisheries management is there to shut down fishing. And I think that in reality, that's what happens when fisheries management fails. And really the objective is to ensure the food security and economic security of the fishers and communities that depend on the fish, and ensure that at the same time those fish stocks can reproduce and replenish themselves. It's really a balancing act, and it's a science that includes biological and social sciences. And so my team is working, we one day we'll be there counting fish and measuring the ages of them. Next day we'll be in meetings negotiating the amount of fish that are in the sea. So it's a real mix of skill sets, but my team is working towards this goal of achieving balance. And so how do we get from an undermanaged fishery to a sustainable fishery? Well, on this diagram, it's the simplified form is that if you know nothing, you collect some data, you analyze that data to tell you what the status of that fishery is. And then from there, you can take management actions to maintain what your objective would be. This seems simple, but it's inherently complex. Just to get to the data collection point, you often need a lot of trust from the fishing community that you're working with to analyze that data. These are complex systems. The marine environment is constantly changing, and we're using mathematical models to predict what we're going to get out of it and how we can maintain it. And then the management action is really where science and social studies come together. And so this is a complex process, but it's what we do. And so I just will tell you a bit about my first experience working in coastal fisheries. So I worked on an island in French Polynesia called Anna Atoll. It's a very small island with about 300 people, and I lived there for 3 years while I was doing my PhD. The primary source of income is copra, dried coconut, and small-scale commercial fisheries. But the community was seeing that their principal fishery resource was declining, which was the bonefish. They call it kio there. And there was a need to manage it for food security, but also because there's not a lot of jobs, there was the idea that maybe we could have ecotourism fly fishing industry, because for those of you who are familiar with the bonefish or not, it is a really highly sought after fish for fly fishing ecotourism. And so the community wanted to see if the declines that they were witnessing was real. And we worked with them to collect data. So here's just a picture of me measuring fish. And Kate's going to tell you a little bit about how measuring fish can help us learn about the status of the stock. But basically, I measured a lot of fish with the community, and we were able to evaluate how healthy that fishery is based on the size of fish we found. And ultimately, we found that the observations of the community were validated by the data. And so with that, we did a lot of outreach, community meetings, work with the schools, work with the leadership of the community to discuss what the potential management options could be for this fishery. And ultimately, the community decided to implement a temporal seasonal closure where 1/3 of the fish's spawning season was protected. And it's in their tradition, it's called rahui. And it's just a temporal closure to allow for regeneration of the stock. So these fish traps is what they're caught in. And they're these beautiful structures made of rocks, and they lower the rocks for 3 months of the year. And then when the rahui is over, they rebuild the rocks and catch the fish as they're migrating to spawn. And what was really special about this is not only did the community want to preserve the fish, but they wanted to preserve their heritage of the rahui ceremony. And so here's just a picture on the right-hand side of the day that they first brought down the traps, a big ceremony and a marae based on their knowledge of what their ancestors did in the past. And so 10 years later, we've seen a recovery in that bonefish stock based on the same data collected over time. We continue to measure fish during the season that's open to fishing. We've seen a recovery. It's been fantastic. And so people are still eating fish. There's plenty of bonefish now. And there's also this ecotourism industry aside with it. And so for us, this was a great success. And for me, it was a PhD. It was a incredible experience in my life. But what I realized was that if I go about it this way for the rest of my life, it took me 3 years to build the trust. Maybe I could do 10 more communities before I retire. But there's so many more communities that need this help and need assistance. So we had to figure out a way to really help coastal fisheries and small island communities. And that's when I started looking for a job and got hired by TNC. But Kate's gonna tell you about that.
Thank you, Alex. And we were so lucky that you were looking at that time. And it was a really nice convergence because as Alex was joining the Nature Conservancy's team, we were also really focused on trying to solve this issue. How do you simplify and reduce the cost for community members, for local managers to actually collect all this basic data and then use it to set sustainable rules? And so in the world's largest and most valuable fisheries, there's a gold standard approach to setting sustainable rules. And that approach doesn't really work in small coastal fisheries. And that's because this type of approach really requires extensive data over long periods that track fish stocks, that track how much fishing effort's happening, and it can be really expensive to implement. So, for example, doing what we call stock assessment on one species in the United States right now can cost upwards of $1.5 million, and that's just a one-time expense that has to be repeated every few years. And so these approaches also tend to be implemented by government agencies, and that can be somewhat top-down. And it means that you can overlook what are traditional or community-based practices in that method. And so this model in total really isn't scalable to the thousands of small coastal fisheries around the world, especially like the ones on Anna Atoll that Alex was just describing. So fortunately, there are simpler science-based approaches that we can use that collect data on the length of fish or other harvested animals. And Alex described this really well. By just tracking this simple data, you can get insights into the health of a fish population. So if we're observing too few big fish or too few small fish, it can indicate that there's overharvesting happening. And then we can use that to guide better decision-making. And so at this time when Alex was joining, or right before Alex was joining, our team in California had developed some technology tools that were enabling divers, primarily here in the red abalone fishery along our north coast, to collect this type of length data, and then we were trying to use it to inform management measures. We looked to go and test this tool with other California fisheries and then with communities in Baja Sur in Mexico that were harvesting pen shell mussels, which is the photo on the right. And at the same time, our team in Hawaii was collaborating with a community on Hawaii Island called Kapulehu, and they were looking to develop what was at the time sort of an unprecedented community-based fisheries management plan, and that would align traditional practices and help ensure sustainable harvests across their 4-mile stretch of coast outside of their community. And so what we were learning from all of these different examples and from each of these communities was they really needed simple, easy to collect data, but they also needed the ability to actually make and implement management decisions more quickly. And so all of those experiences really led us to develop FishKit. And what FishKit is, it's a free digital toolkit software, and it gives users the ability to rapidly analyze the health of their fisheries and then do just that, develop simple rules like a size limit. And so the intended users for this are all the people that are closest to the resource: fishermen, local community leaders, local managers. And what it does is it actually puts fishery science into their hands, and it automates some of these analyses and really helps visualize trade-offs that communities have to grapple with when deciding how to set sustainable rules. And so it'd be like taking Alex, an expert like Alex, and making his expertise available through software. Try to reach as many communities as we can. But this toolkit really doesn't do it all, and we purposefully limited the scope of it to really simple rules that would work in most coastal fisheries. And we based all of those off of this simple principle of just not harvesting fish before they've had a chance to grow large enough to reproduce. And we think that based on how it's been built, FishKit has the potential to impact upwards of 20% of global catch. And our goal right now is to increase the number and the impact of new management measures that are going into place by really equipping people on the water as first line managers. And so just as Alex was coming on board here, we were looking to deploy and test FishKit. And so I'm going to hand it back over to Alex here, and he's going to share what that demonstration looked like in French Polynesia.
Thanks, Kate. So yeah, at this time, we were looking for places that would benefit from this sort of fisheries management assistance. And it just so happened that Rangiroa, which is another island in the Tuamotus, about 80 kilometers from Anna, not far, was seeing declines in their long-nosed emperor fishery. And so the mayor had reached out to TNC and asked if we could assist them. I had just been hired, and I was talking to Kate's team, and they developed the tool. And it really did take a lot of the analysis that I spent years doing and put it in an easy way to access for people. So I said, all right, let's try it. So we demonstrated its use in a place in Rangiroa. And so the long-nosed emperor fishery on Rangiroa is one of the largest in the world. They're caught during spawning migrations during the new moon phase. And these fish are all either consumed locally, but the majority of them are exported to Tahiti. And they were seeing a decline in the stock over the last 20 years. So we were invited to help assess that. So to do so, we had a lot of community meetings, discussed the traditional knowledge of the fishers and what their beliefs were in the fish stock. And we just started measuring length data. Just very simply, we collected length data on the size of fish harvested. And then the community was able to use FishKit to assess that fishery's health. And it confirmed their observations that in fact it was being overexploited. And they were able to use this other tool in FishKit called the size limit builder, which looks at trade-offs at protecting fish at a certain size, how much fish you can catch, how much you would release, and what the potential reproductive output might be of that stock with that management scenario. And they decided to implement a 45 centimeter size limit. And that 45 centimeter size limit would protect all juveniles and adults till their first year of reproduction. So based on that, the mayor approved that management measure that only not for, if you need to eat a small fish, that's fine. We're never going to stop people from feeding their family. But for commercial exploitation, there was a minimum size limit. So we then worked on a lot of education and outreach, and this is just an example of one of the posters we put together, just explaining to the community that, at 45 centimeters, a long-nosed emperor is 4 years old, it's reproduced at least once, it's mature, and it's a good size to harvest. And so then there became the implementation phase. So this fishery had two sectors. It had a handline fishery, where they're caught with hook and line, and it has a trap fishery. So for the hook and line fishery, it's quite easy. We just made these sticker rulers that you could glue onto a bench in your boat or a cooler or any hard surface allowed fishers to easily recognize the size of the fish that was acceptable for sale. But for the trap fishery, it was really difficult because the fish come in to these giant weirs the size of a baseball diamond in huge numbers, and it's really hard to get the juveniles out. So we worked with the fishers to design an escape panel, which you can see on the left-hand side, that basically allows undersized fish to escape through the bars and large fish to be stuck because their head is too wide. So we worked with the fishers. This was their idea, and we said, okay, let's try it. We implement it, worked, and we had a solution. So that's how that worked. And then, ultimately the community wanted to see if this management effort had an impact. So we trained the community to continue to measure fish and use FishKit, the stock health tracker, to monitor over time. It's been 5 years since this project started, and since we had the first size limit enacted, we've seen a gradual increase in the reproductive potential of the stock and fairly good compliance with the management measure. And so at that time, my boss, this guy named Chuck, is a legend in conservation, and he always pushed, got to do more. And he said, you did good, Alex, your team's did well, but it took time. It still took time. How can we really scale this to meet the needs of the region? And I think the thing that takes the most time, honestly, is building trust and enabling the people that are working with the fishery and the fishers to have the trust. So the idea was, why not take the people who already have the trust and train them to do what we do? And so we developed a training program, and it's basically a fisheries 101 training program and fellowship that takes fishers and people close to fishing from the islands and teaches them everything they would need to know that they would get from a fisheries 101 course, and then equips them with that knowledge and puts them into the community to use FishKit to find out how to manage their fishery. So with that, we partnered with the Center for Maritime Training. This is a trade school based in Tahiti that focuses on teaching Polynesians anything to do with the marine environment. So we're talking about marine mechanics, navigation, aquaculture, fishing, and now fisheries management. We also partnered with the Direction of Marine Resources, which is the national fisheries management agency for French Polynesia. And we developed a curriculum that put everything you would learn in like your first semester of fisheries degree in a handbook and curriculum, teaching about the life cycle of fish, signs of overfishing, different management measures, what are the objectives, how can we get there? And we also developed like a hands-on curriculum. And we recruited 5 students from 4 different islands across the Tuamotu archipelago. And all of these islands had mayors and leadership that said they needed help with their fisheries. So we have Milene from Aratua, Titirava from Manihi, Betty from Faiite, and Johan and Matai from Raiatea. And so we brought them all together for a 2-week intensive training that involved like practical field work of collecting that size data, species identification, also entering data into computers and using FishKit to analyze it, as well as the theory behind all that. And then after the training, all of the students had a 1-year fellowship that was paid, where they would go back to their island and collect data on the size of fish have harvested for 1 year. So that's them doing their work. And throughout that year, they constantly had updates to the community, presenting why they're doing this, why it's important, and how they need the help of that community. So here's just some pictures of the students communicating back to their community. And so this is the 9-month data. We just finished the 12 months internship, but as of 9 months, the students had hosted over 21 community meetings. It's a lot more now, reached over 200 members. These are small communities, but they have a lot of impact on the resources around them. And they've measured over 26,000 fish. Now it's actually closer to 40,000. And so with that, they were able to estimate the stock status of 20 different species across the four islands. And they were able to generate some outreach materials that showed the life history, the biology basically of their key species, how the stock is doing based on fish kit results, and priority species for management based on that. And so here's just an example of one poster that was made for the island of Aratua showing the top 6 species for management. And I just came back from a month-long trip where we were presenting the data back to the community as kind of the final culmination of the project. And so each student presented to the community the data, the stock status, all of their work over the year, and they gave the outreach materials to the local governments there. And for me, this was an incredible experience because, you know, a year ago today, essentially, these students had just finished that 2-week intensive training. We had no idea how it was going to go, but over the course of the year, they excelled in collecting data. They already had a lot of trust, but even improving the trust in the process and then communicating, I barely had to say a word. They just took these presentations and ran with it, showed so much grasp of the concept and knowledge. And I was really proud of them. They did a great job. We had 3 out of 5 communities wanting to make new management measures, and the other 2 already had management measures, and they were happy to see that it was actually improving their stock. So just overall, a very positive response. And so this is our first cohort of the program, and the whole team that supported them. They did a fantastic job, and now the CMMPF, which is the Center for Maritime Training, and the DRM, they want to continue this. So we're looking for ways to continue offering cohorts, and we believe that we can go from doing 1 island every 3 years to 5 islands every year and start to spread this capacity across French Polynesia and the larger region. And so because my team is and myself is responsible for this entire region, we also believe that this pilot project we did in French Polynesia would work in Micronesia. And so all of those islands to the left-hand side of the map, we've developed the curriculum in English as well, and we're looking to start similar programs across Micronesia because they share very similar problems with their fisheries. The fish are almost the same in many cases, and we believe that in the future we'll be able to really build capacity across the region through this method of scaling. And yeah, I think I'm going to pass it off to Kate.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. Thanks for that amazing presentation. We got to hear how these tools are being used on the ground from Anna to Rangiroa, and you really helped bring a lot of this to life, I think, for us. So we were able to talk through the challenges that we know are facing coastal fisheries in the region, talked about the importance of local leadership and the power of some of these really simple science-based tools like FishKit that are helping support communities in managing their resources. And this work really is about people. It's about ensuring that families can continue to fish, that traditions can be passed down, and that the ocean can really remain a source of food, culture, and connection for generations to come. And the challenges here are big. The path forward, I think, is somewhat clear. We know we want to invest in local knowledge, need to equip communities with the tools that they need and support them in leading the way, because when we do that, we don't just protect fish and ecosystems, but we really do help restore abundance and resilience and hope across the Pacific. So we're going to shift here now into Q&A. So please put your questions into the Q&A if you have any. And before we shift over, I want to give Kalani the opportunity to introduce himself, and then I will help moderate our question and answer session. Kalani, take it away.
Hey, aloha mai kako, aloha everyone. Thanks so much, Kate and Alex. That was a great presentation. So again, my name is Kalani Kiocho. I'm located here in Hilo on the island of Hawaii, where I was born and raised. As was mentioned, I serve as the Hawaii Island Marine Program Director for TNC Hawaii and Palmyra. I've been in this role for 42 days, so I'm super ready for all your questions. But like Alex and Kate, I love fish. I grew up in a Hawaiian fishing community. Some of my most impactful experiences in fisheries management occurred when I was a commercial fisherman in a small scale fishery here in Hawaii. And also when I worked as a NOAA longline fishery observer on swordfish and tuna fishing vessels. Eventually, I had the opportunity to take these experiences into my work with NOAA developing fishing regulations for national marine sanctuaries and marine national monuments here in the Pacific. And now I have the opportunity to work with our communities and our partners here on Hawaii Island to support place-based management of fisheries here at home. So mahalo for the opportunity to share, and looking forward to the great interactions here today. Mahalo nui.
Thank you, Kalani. I'm wondering, just to kick us off, if you wouldn't mind, Kalani, just telling us a little bit about what is touching down in Hawaii, work that the Nature Conservancy is doing with communities on coastal fisheries, and what that looks like today.
Yeah, happy to do that. Thanks for the opportunity to share about what's happening here in Hawaii. I think that we're in this massive movement in Hawaii regarding marine stewardship and management of our resources. And what comes to mind is how communities are leading the way. Communities have risen up, given a new definition for what it means to do community-based management here in Hawaii and other places. And that has been a great learning opportunity for all involved, including agencies and nonprofits like TNC, to figure out how can we best support them in relationship to what they're striving to do, which is, I think, to feed their people, their communities, to perpetuate their cultural rights and responsibilities to place. And so there's a lot of learning opportunity in that. What that looks like here in Hawaii, I would say, is, things like restoring and sustaining ancient fish ponds for aquaculture production, stewarding ancestral fishing grounds, or what we call ko'a. So these are fish aggregates that we feed as Hawaiian community members. Restoring coral reefs, working towards greater involvement in place-based management in partnership with the state of Hawaii. I think there are a lot of case studies that highlight how community-driven collaborative management is a viable pathway for achieving all of the conservation targets we've talked about here today, and also engaging with government institutions and other organizations in caring for and governing biocultural resources and habitats. So one example that comes to mind, because there are many, is one that you mentioned, Kate, and that was Ka'upulehu's Tri-Weight Initiative. And this is a community here on Hawaii Island on the Kona side that really took on that kuleana, as we say here in Hawaii, that responsibility, which is also a right and an obligation to take care of your place. So in the 90s, I know, long story short, there were Native Hawaiian descendants of Ka'upulehu. So these are families that have been there a long time, saw this huge decline in fish and other marine resources at Ka'upulehu. And they tried to create a management plan, or they created a management plan in the existing Ka'upulehu Marine Life Advisory Council, which is now called the Hui Kahuvai Marine Life Advisory Council. It's a mix of private, nonprofit, and local community members. They created a fisheries management plan that was based on voluntary fishing guidance for the public, and also guidelines that were based on Hawaiian traditions. 10 years later, in 2009, following 10 years of what they consider to be public failure to comply with these voluntary fishing guidances or guidelines, and seeing the continued decline of fish abundance at Ka'upulehu, they reached out to the Nature Conservancy for our expertise in research and monitoring. And we underwent this process to support their fact finding of what was going on at Ka'upulehu. And the community decided that they wanted to undergo this amendment process to redesign an existing fish replenishment area at Ka'upulehu. And what they did was they actually overwhelmingly achieved, with community support, with nonprofit and state support, this amendment that allowed for a 10-year rest period, which essentially prohibited all types of take, fishing, and harvest, including themselves, including preventing Native Hawaiian families from harvesting in this area. A huge sacrifice, a generational sacrifice. 10 years of not teaching our keiki, our children, the next generation, how to fish in their place, and to care for their place. So in this time, which is called the try-wait, and this is a term in Pidgin, which is kind of saying, please, can you wait? Very nicely, try-wait. For 10 years, while we learn what this action can do for the place, for the people, what kinds of outreach and education and rural development can we achieve in this 10 years, a management plan that will be ready for when we open 10 years for responsible, sustainable use, sustenance, subsistence of this area with the state as a co-manager of sorts. So that 10 years occurred, or the 10-year no-take was established in July of 2016. So next summer, July 2026, is when the 10-year try-wait will be up. And so right now, they're undergoing this initiative called Worth the Wait, and recognizing that these 10 years, we've been doing a lot of work, not just waiting, but really preparing ourselves with all the great science and all the great policy and management developments to be ready for this 10-year open, and hopefully undergoing this rulemaking process with the state of Hawaii to create a fisheries management area for Ka'upulehu. So just a great story about how we can, as TNC, can support communities and what they're trying to achieve for their place, with science in mind, with culture in mind, and with place-based values. Yeah, mahalo nui. Thank you for allowing me to share that.
Thank you so much, Kalani. I know there are some questions that we're looking to understand the just general use and expansion of replenishment zones, or the try-wait example from Hawaii, or Alex, the rahui in French Polynesia. So I'm wondering if both of you might just expand a little bit on how the idea of replenishment zones and some traditional practices really do come together with coastal fisheries sustainable management. I know you just covered a lot of it, Kalani, but Alex, maybe if you can make the connection between rahui and try-wait, that would be great.
Sure, absolutely. So I think across the Pacific Islands, there's a history of managing resources, because people had to live off of what was there. There was no boat coming in, and so historically, and so there's different terminologies for a very similar practice. So in a sense, rahui is like a try-wait, and in for example, Palau, they call it bull, and at a time of when the leadership sees that resources are being depleted, in Palau, the chiefs will put a bull on them, and it's a temporary ban to allow for regeneration of the stock. So this is not a new thing. This is something that's been done for years, but it's become more challenging to implement in kind of with the globalization and westernization of a lot of these communities, because some of those traditional practices were suppressed. And then, you have the cash economies coming in. And so what we're seeing now is a renaissance of those practices. And I think that's what Kalani is giving us a great example in Hawaii. And our work is really supporting that throughout the Pacific. And, nowadays, sometimes you just need a little bit of science. I mean, really, in my mind, I think it's like good science confirms traditional and local ecological knowledge. If someone's seeing it decline and our science can't pick that up, there's something wrong with the way we're doing the science. But it just helps support the movement to have some good data to then evaluate and show the progress from. So I think, to answer the question, this is a part of Pacific Island culture, and we're just helping support that renaissance.
Alex, I'm so glad you brought up Rahui, because anytime I hear that, I think about how that relates to our practices here in Hawaii. And as you mentioned, Rahui in Hawaiian language would be Lahui, so it's an L instead of an R. And essentially the Triway Initiative is a type of Lahui for Hawaii. Those are, as you said, those for us, it's temporary no take of a particular area or particular species for a time, not, for, forever, but so that we can see the resource rebound and recover. And that's part of our intimate relationship and understanding of the resource. Yeah, that's a response to our relationship with the resource, with the environment. And so I would say that, yes, it's a traditional practice that has been modernized, or it has to exist in modern, society with, state rules or different processes that we have to navigate. But it's based on Hawaiian values. This is a Hawaiian action that happens to be supported by the state of Hawaii. Another type of designation that we have here in Hawaii is called CBSFA for short. It's community-based subsistence fishing areas. And these are state legally designated areas where communities and the state government work together to protect and support traditional and customary Native Hawaiian fishing practices that families rely on. The Hawaii CBSFA designation is formally recognizes local families as valued partners, and they co-develop the regulations for these CBSFAs. And these practices or these restrictions are based on traditional customary practices of the place. So it's not a cookie cutter approach. It's based on the traditions of that place. And what we see at Ha'ena on Kauai is very different than what we see in Miloli'i on Hawaii Island, which is very different from what we see at Kipahulu on Maui. But it's a great kind of codification in our current government system with the state of Hawaii recognizing Native Hawaiian rights and responsibilities to take care of place. So mahalo.
Thank you, Kalani. I know we have so many questions coming in, and I want to get to as many as we can. One of the questions that I think would be really important for us to cover up front here that a number of folks have asked is just what is the connection between managing fishing and the impact on coral reef health? And what does it mean if you have overfishing for coral reef health? So I'm wondering, Alex, Kalani, if you want to give us just a little primer on how we think about managing fishing and what the impacts are to coral reef health and how critical it is.
Sure, I can speak to a little bit of that. I mean, so, fish on the reef, they all have a job. And what they're doing is they're maintaining the reef. And so when we start removing certain species from the reef, it's like we're removing some job from society. And one example I can give is herbivore reef fish, right? So these are your parrotfish, your surgeon fishes, any fish that is eating algae that grows on the reef, those fish are basically suppressing algae growth, which grows much faster than coral. So when you remove lots of herbivores from a reef, what we tend to see is algae blooms, which then choke out, they cover the coral. The coral is no longer able to see sunlight and can no longer survive. It dies. And this is some of the types of imbalances that occur when you have unsustainable fishing practices. So throughout Micronesia, Polynesia, and also for Hawaii, which is part of Polynesia, but you know, this is our new initiative, is really to focus on herbivore management, because they're such a critical ecosystem engineer by keeping the algae in check so that the coral can live. And yeah, every fish has a job. That's a good example of one where fisheries management is incredibly important.
I'll just add, since Alex, you were so eloquent in describing the like ecological roles that fish have, the cultural functions that fish have as well. So in our cultures, all of our fish have cultural meaning or significance or value. And so when you don't have a fish in a certain place which historically had it or is known for it or carries the stories or the practices related to that place, you can no longer practice it. You can no longer tell the stories in the same way. And so that cultural heritage starts to erode with the ecological degradation that's occurring as well. So those things are hand in hand. They coexist together. Mahalo.
Excellent. Thank you both. We're getting some questions about just how FishKit is applied and what the process looks like in communities. So some of these questions have asked, when FishKit, say, proposes a new size limit or fishery regulation, what does the community actually get to say? And so one thing I wanted to share is that our interest in developing FishKit wasn't to come in and offer up suggestions to communities. It was more to make it possible so that communities or local managers could actually make those decisions themselves with really clear, scientifically based information that also allowed them to bring in their interests and traditional practices, customary practices. And so FishKit doesn't actually give you an answer or a suggestion. It gives you a way to actually view all the information and streamline a lot of that decision making. But we're also seeing questions about what happens after a rule goes into place and what can we do to actually know whether or not it's working. And so, Alex, you talked about this a little bit in Rangiroa, where we've been able to use different parts of the toolkit, like say the stock health tracker, to monitor over time. But I think the really important thing here is that actually having data collectors trained and operating in communities is what makes all of that possible. So it's this virtuous cycle where we're able to continue looking at what the impacts of these measures might be and allowing for communities to make decisions about how to adjust them over time. And so there's no real limit, there's no real direction. And hopefully it gets us to a place of better decision making that works for communities. I know we've also been getting questions here that are asking about what's next and how we see this work evolving. What's the plan to get to the next 100 communities? And what would preclude FishKit from being used in more places or globally? So I'm wondering, Alex, Kalani, if you have any thoughts about what you think is next in your areas, and then we could give a little treatment to what we're thinking about for the whole coastal fisheries program as well.
I could just briefly say, our hope for French Polynesia, we're looking to do another cohort, and some of the students from this cohort have just really excelled. and we believe that they can be the next teacher. So we want to basically take our students from this cohort, help run the next one, and they'll be the ones going into the field assisting. Because it did take, for example, for me, I spent a lot of last year assisting our students, and I just think that now we have professionals that can assist them, and then I'm going to start moving this operation towards Micronesia. And one other thing that we're doing is we're also partnering with some of the agencies like SPC to put this tool. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's the Secretariat of the Pacific. They basically are in charge of working with fisheries, coastal fisheries for all the Pacific Islands. And we're working on integrating some of their tools with FishKit so that this would be accessible to basically all the Pacific Island countries that need it. And yeah, so I mean, it's a process. We're working on it. But yeah, I don't know, Kalani, what do you think?
Yeah, thanks for that. For Hawaii Island and the state of Hawaii, we're looking at using FishKit for the Holomoa process that's going to start here on Hawaii Island. Holomoa is a state initiative that was initially in response to the Paris Agreement and reaching the 30 by 30 targets. And the feedback that the state of Hawaii received from communities was that it's not about 30 by 30, it's more about place-based, what's needed for all of our islands, which are unique things. So they started off this Holomoa initiative on Maui. It's about to conclude there, lots of lessons learned. And the state of Hawaii Division of Aquatic Resources and communities here on Hawaii Island are interested in FishKit. So as we are invited to use that and work collaboratively with our communities, we're happy to support the Holomoa process any way we can, which is coming up soon.
It is excellent. Thank you both. I think the only thing I'll add is that, you know, one of our interests across the Fish Kit program is to really think about how we can expand our reach so that it's not just moving at the speed of the trust that TNC representatives can establish in communities, but it's actually growing far beyond that. And one of the ways we're looking at doing that is taking a sort of train the trainers approach. And so what Alex described about the fellowship in French Polynesia is a great example of how we can start building out and embedding these training programs with agency partners or other regional technical capacity providers like SPC or the Pacific Community, and allow others to take on that role of training and continuing to expand and grow the impact of being able to make some of these decisions more quickly or more easily in lots of communities. And one of our biggest needs in that space is actually figuring out how to build in public funding sources with those partners so that this is sustainable over time and so that we can see those training programs continue and really expand the impact and reach here. So that is definitely one focal point for all of us over the next few years. I know we're at time. There was one question that I think is always really important to cover, which is just, what can we do? And I think it comes down to education. Know, you know, if you like eating fish, know about what fish are sustainable in the place that you are or where you're going. If you educate yourself, you can share that with family and friends, and you can ask more questions. The more we ask, the more we learn, the more we know, better off all of our resources are going to be. So with that, I want to thank Alex and Kalani so much. Thank you for all of your insights today and sharing it. And I want to thank everybody for joining and for all of your interest and all of the fantastic questions that I am sorry we did not get a chance to cover all of them. But this webinar is going to be recorded, and in the next few days, you'll get a link to the recording. And so if you'd like to share it, please do that. And we look forward to seeing you on another webinar soon. Thanks so much.
Mahalo, everyone. Take care. Aloha.
Thank you.